Oh, good morning, everybody. I knew we'd have an exciting crowd because yesterday we were setting up. There's no one here except for us, the stage crew, and two people walked in and said, "Where's the show?" They were so excited. I hear her in the back. There we go. They're from Michigan. They drove in a day early for this. So I'm really excited to host this panel. Turn is just a fantastic show, and these three actors have been just wonderful to get to know. For those of you who don't know, the Culper Spy Ring was the most successful clandestine operation in U.S. military history until Operation Overlord during World War II. The Fortitude Plan that helps deceive Hitler is going to be the next most major thing that we see. So I think it's amazing. Not only do we not know a lot about these people because they were so good at their jobs, but we have these actors up here who can have a little bit of, I think, free reign to make these characters their own while also keeping them historically along the right lines. So I'm really excited to be here, and I want to start off with Seth, and this will be the question for all three of you, and we'll work our way down the line. For those unfamiliar with the show, how would you describe your character in just a few sentences?
Wow, well, it's hard to keep it to a few sentences, but Tallmadge is from Connecticut, and I think the important thing is to think about his way into this story. And I'm sure a lot of people here already know about the context, about the beginnings of the conflict, but I think the reason why he ended up where he did in his position is because of the personal aspect for him. He went to Yale, and he became very close friends to Nathan Hale. They were really, really close. They were a part of societies together. They got into trouble together. They were really close, and when Hale was executed for his participation in spying, it hit him really hard. He joined up. He was a lieutenant. He was involved in the Battle of Long Island, and his brother was also in that battle, was taken prisoner, and later died as a prisoner on the prison ships in Wallabout Bay in Brooklyn. I live in Brooklyn now. I used to live almost in the shadow of the prison ship Martyr Monument in Fort Greene Park, and so that was extremely personal to him. And in the same battle, he saw Washington's skill, even though there were many errors made, but his skill in extracting the men from that situation and the care that he gave to saving them from that situation. And Washington saw his capacity as a leader and brought him in and made him the leader of this burgeoning intelligence effort. And they worked very closely together. We don't know a lot of what actually went on personally between them, and that's what we kind of get to explore fictionally in the show, but those are kind of the beginnings of how he came into the story.
And I think it's an amazing story, and it shows a deep background and I'm plus, Washington's putting a lot of trust in a 24-year-old to take over his new spy ring. I'm going to call her Anna right now. So tell us about Anna.
She just needs one name, you know. Anna Strong was such a beautiful character to approach because I think she gave us a great window into the domestic experience of war. And particularly at that time when we started the season, I think one of the very first scenes we shot where it was Sam and I together to portray the oppressiveness of having soldiers quartered in your home. And I think as I approached Anna, I just, in a few sentences, I think she had a quiet defiance, which was perhaps all that was allowed for her to have at that time. But I think she wielded it in such a crafty and clever way. She capitalized on her friendships, and she kept the war really close to herself, I think. She was a quite secretive woman, I think, and kept the perception of maintaining normalcy and dutifulness and subservience. But she was operating on a whole other level underneath that, and I think particularly in that first pilot episode, we get to see her at her wit's end with the situation and trying to convince Abe to join them and to help. And when is it enough? Like, when have we got to the point where we need to fight back? And so I think for Anna, she was such a wonderful illustration of war on the home front and what particularly women were having to shoulder during that time.
And Heather, I think you brought this almost older confidence to Anna, because she was the oldest member of the spy ring. So I think that you showed a little bit of maturity for her, and I thought that was always a great way, the way that you carried yourself throughout the series as the character. So Captain Simcoe, can we learn a little bit about, who would think that Captain Simcoe wrote the first Valentine's Day letter in American history, allegedly? He's such a romantic. We saw that on the screen. So can we learn more about this romantic John Simcoe?
So I'm thinking of how to describe him. I think angelic is too strong a word, but teddy bear feels wrong. He's a British officer that comes from a very disciplined first naval and then military background, sent to America in the regular army, and then subsequently took over the Queen's Rangers, which at the time was not as organized, not as disciplined, and not as deadly as they became under his leadership. The Queen's Rangers led some of the most successful missions during the Revolution. He obviously at the end, really what he's most famous for is after the Revolution, when he went and founded Upper Canada, and he was the first lieutenant governor. He abolished slavery there, and he, has a very good record. History has been kind to him, which is remarkable given the work that I did with him. But it was quite the ride playing him. The thing is, this might be coming up later, so I'm just going to, get ahead of it. How did I get away with playing him the way he was? And I think there's something to be said about the optics of war, right? That we don't really know, unless we were there, what actually happened in the heat of battle and what decisions and actions our fellow humans had to engage in order to get the job done. So therefore, there is some license to imagine a person the way they were during a very gruesome war, and then who they became afterwards. Maybe in some kind of atonement, maybe for other reasons. And it's not an excuse to have that kind of fun with him, but if you ever read Simcoe's memoirs, it struck me immediately that they were all in the third person, which isn't normal, in my opinion. And also, it takes a certain kind of leader to take, especially at that time, to take a group of camouflaged warriors into a country you don't know very well and be successful, even on the small, obviously not on the grander scale of the war, but in the things that they engaged in. So it was extraordinary fun to play this role, and the writers really served me up, and I took the ball and ran with it. But but that's who he was, and he was a complex man, I think. And even in his in the rest of his life in Canada, no human's life is straightforward and black and white,
Yeah, he is a remarkable character if you look into him. And he wrote his memoirs about 6 years after the War of Independence for America, and they're fascinating. They're absolutely fascinating to read, and there's a lot to unpack there. So Seth mentioned something, and I want to jump back to something you said, Samuel, but Seth, you mentioned something in the green room about how you were walking the line between fact and fiction. This is the show is based off of Alex Rose's book about the Culper spy ring, but these are ordinary people, for the most part, doing extraordinary things in harrowing times, but we don't know a lot about them. So can you tell us a little bit about how you formed your characters based around the history, and then where did the line of history and fiction come together? Because remember, folks, this is a television show. It has to be entertaining, but it's also informative. There's definitely history in there.
Yeah, well, I mean, an interesting place to start based on what Sam was just saying is, you could say that there's historical license when it comes to Simcoe, was he really that guy? But we almost didn't get any of that because Sam wasn't supposed to be with us past the end of the pilot. The clip that you just saw where Caleb Brewster kicks him in the face to knock him out, we shot that as him getting shot in the head, and he would never have existed as a character beyond that point in the series. But because Sam is incredible, and his performance was incredible, and everyone on set loved him, they said, we have to have this character as the main antagonist of the series for the rest of the show, which is interesting because that would have been historically way less accurate because obviously he lived and went on to do these other things. So it's, sometimes the creative and the historical, the blurry lines are even harder to predict. But I think that our show is an interesting example of where creativity has something to offer in relief with historical fact, because this story, first of all, very little of it was known at all until the 1930s when there were things published and all of this came to light. And it's because they did their job very well. It was a spy effort. Nobody knew what was going on. But because of that, the nature of it, there just is no way of knowing. So yes, they took some creative licenses and changed some things. But when you don't know, when there's no way of knowing, then part of what we get to do is to fill in the blanks, knowing that people are who they are. So we know that Washington and Tallmadge had this relationship working on the things that they did. They had their successes and their failures. And when you look at it in terms of events, it goes in a straight line. But when you think about human beings, it doesn't work that way. You're pushing and you're pulling, you have your compromises, you have your arguments, you have your coming back together. We don't know how any of that happened. But in the writer's room and with us on set, we can bring our perspectives of how do people interact and how do people navigate those things, and we're hopefully bringing some depth and texture into what that might have been. And as a viewer, then you're put into that perspective. What would that have been like for me? And I think that that's where we have something to offer in terms of these historical conversations. With Tallmadge, he wrote a memoir as well, but the usefulness for me of what he wrote ends basically at what I just was talking about with his involvement at the Battle of Brooklyn and his brother. And he doesn't even talk about Nathan Hale because it was too close to the spy effort. He couldn't say anything about any of that because no one could know about it at that time. He makes no reference to the Culper ring because it was all still classified information at the time that he was writing his memoir. So I read it and thought, well, I get nothing from this that's interesting in terms of playing the character. So a lot of it had to be imaginative work, and either you can look at it and say, well, that's not true, or you can say there is a truth in that and how we, and sorry, I'll stop talking, but there was also, there was Agent 355, which was part of the Culper ring, that was kind of the only agent that we don't know who it was. Tallmadge had this whole list of all the agents. 355, nobody knows. And some people think that that was Anna's number. In our show, that wasn't, but we created Idara's character, Abigail, and that was totally fictional. But I think there's a truth in there could have, probably would have been enslaved characters, female characters, characters that are on the fringes of our understanding of this conflict that would have or could have been a part of these stories. What I love about the recent Ken Burns documentary is how he brings those perspectives in ways that we haven't been doing in the past. And again, our work can do that imaginatively in a way that gets you engaged. And I love that.
Yeah, I love how you pointed out that there's probably more members of the Ring we don't know about. We know about roughly a half dozen. They're formed around 1778, but the whole show goes from the start of the war to the end of the war, which I like. It takes you through the war. But Heather, you had to have had the hardest time, between sitting here between Tallmadge and Simcoe. Anna's character, there's not much out there. We don't know a lot about her. How did you form her character? Was there any sort of research that goes into this? And how are you putting yourself into her shoes, I should say?
I mean, so much of it was imaginative, but I think that, like Seth's saying, there's truth in imagination. If you try to study human beings, but also when I first got the job, I looked at paintings of the era. I looked at poetry of the era, which I thought was an interesting way in. Also, it can't be understated how much the writers helped us. I mean, Alex was a brilliant resource, and then our showrunner, Craig Silverstein, he really made these people out of his own mind as well. And, I as an actress, I get a lot of information from the way my characters speak, the tone they speak at, and for some reason, that was a great way in for me. The idea of the dialects which we approached, which we can talk about more, but just trying to find my way through how this woman operated in the world, who she was surrounded by. Also, the props and the costumes department in this show were so spectacular. Like for the first season, Donna Zakowska was our costume designer, and she put me in only homespun fabrics. I mean, it was costly and hard work. I mean, she wanted me to feel that the fabrics I was putting next to my skin were things that could have been made at that time or in that way. And those things really, they really influence us. And I think we do have some kind of universal consciousness that we can understand what other people may have felt. And so I think as actors, we have to have a really strong faith in that mystery. And for me, yeah, I sort of like playing characters where there's not much known, because I think there's so much to unearth with the quiet people. There's so much to unearth with the people who aren't talking so much about themselves or didn't have the ability to write a memoir. Like what was her day-to-day existence? And the show gave me a real opportunity to explore that, to really be sewing, to really be washing dishes, to really be sweeping the floor of the tavern. Like that, just like we visited the museum last night and had an immersive experience of what it would be like to live in that period, maybe. We got that experience every day on set. And so as the show went on, we developed a better sense of the sound of my skirts on the ground, the feeling of the corset, just the sound of the horses outside the window. Like that really infused me with a sense of imagination and also a launching point from which to create a person. It was so thrilling.
And the three of you were fans. We were in the back watching the clips with you, and I mean, they were like, "Look how well that's shot! Oh, that was great! Awesome!" Like it was great to see. Like they're really invested. I really enjoyed
Look how young we were.
And they're all still beautiful. So, before we jump into a question, I want you to ponder who had the best or worst accents on the set. Samuel, let me ask you about the writers. Okay, we're making three characters up here. How much leeway did they give to you? Was it you have to stick to the words on the page? Were you given a chance to go off the cuff? How did that play out for you?
Yeah, well, to add to what Seth was saying about the pilot. So initially, yes, the Simcoe role was meant to just exist as an antagonist in the pilot. And when the show got picked up to series, one of the conditions was that they added Simcoe as a series regular. I think because they realized that it wasn't enough to just have the redcoats as an enemy. You needed to focus on a singular person to hate. Yeah. And they knew that I was a good person for that. But what was interesting, when you begin a pilot that isn't a series yet, so it's a test to see is it going to be good enough to take all the way. I think one of the things that we all know that not everybody here might know is that it happens very fast, relatively. From the time that you get cast in the role to rolling camera on that episode, sometimes it's not very long at all. In my case, it was, I think, like less than a week from when, because I was initially up for some other things, and then they said, here, come and do this role. And then I flew to Virginia, and I arrived, and then that same day, we went and did a table read of the first episode. Before that, I had a meeting, like a couple of hours before that table read, I had a meeting with Craig Silverstein and then also Rupert Wyatt, who was directing the first episode. And Rupert said to me, he said, I want this guy to be a little off. Maybe he has like a stutter or something. Because I said, yeah, I said, I agree. I think it would be a big mistake because he does terrible things to people. To have him be, a tough guy, I think that's not very interesting. And I said, but I also think a stutter's a little bit on the nose. That's a little bit too on the spectrum for him. So I think, what about if he's just like the nicest person you've ever met? And he was like, well, what do you mean? I was like, well, I don't know. Maybe he should like speak, a different register to the way I speak, and maybe he has a bit of a higher voice or something. And I don't know. And he said, oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, go with that. And that was the end of the meeting. So I walked out the room and got frightened because I was like, well, I've got to put my money where my mouth is now. And then then we had this big table read, remember, with all the executives from AMC. It was my first TV show in America, and I didn't really know what was going to come out of my mouth or how it was going to sound. I just my brain said, just do that. So I just started talking, and then suddenly, and then everyone looked at me. And I couldn't tell whether it was because they thought it was completely wrong or quite good. So I just told myself, let's assume it's quite good and just keep going. Anyway, so we got to the end of it, and then I was expecting to get fired or at best told off, And everyone was just like, good job. And then, of course, months later, they decided to pick up the show, and they took the character to series. What was interesting about that is, as Seth said, there was never a plan for it. So the writing had to take, at least as it related to my character, had to take a turn, no pun intended. Or was it? And they had to do something a little bit different. Now, what happened was, because I'd come up with this kind of flowery kind of, guy, the writing would often come in overwritten. It was gorgeous. Like, usually actors were like, give me more words, more. But in my case, I would get the writing and I'd want it to be less. Because in the pilot, he doesn't actually say very much, but what he says bites, So I was always, as far as the collaboration went, I was always leaning towards, let's see how we can do this with the least words possible. And in that respect, it was incredibly collaborative, and the writers were very responsive. So each episode usually has a different writer, because you can't, because you're on set working as a writer on set whilst they're writing the next episode. So
making changes and things like that.
So you can't be in the writing room and on set at the same time. And the writer who's on set, is really a teammate as you're shooting the project. And certainly from my perspective, and they'll speak to this as well, but we had active conversations each scene, really, about, can we do it with less? What about saying this instead of that? And so that was incredibly helpful and incredibly collaborative and fun. It was really fun to do that.
It seemed like a very fun set, the way you were all back there kind of cheering it on. I really loved that. So I want to ask a question about accents, since we're there. But before I do, I really, talking about how you said fewer words for Simcoe, I love some of the scenes that Jared pulled for us. Jared Frederick helped pull that scene, the clips before. And I loved with Heather and Burn Gorman, when you were having that scene where you're about to get married, your eyes, both of you, were talking without saying a word. I thought it was a very moving scene. And you, at the end of season 1, when you're just enraged, standing beside Major Hewlett, played by Burn Gorman, you can see it. You're just seething. And then Seth, whenever you walk up to Heather mending the flag, you can see you've seen the enemy, you've seen battle. So I think there were a lot of times where they gave you the opportunity not to speak, and I think you took advantage of that.
I do just want to say, the reason why those moments resonate is because they're true human behaviors.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's very dramatic to see Simcoe, grab a guy and take him out and shoot him on the top of a hill. Of course, that's like a hugely dramatic thing to do.
And a Tuesday for him.
Yeah, you got to leave yourself somewhere to go for the rest of the week.
Yeah.
But the thing is, everybody can relate to a boss or a sibling or a parent not taking the reins at a moment when you think they should, or not taking action when they think they should. What we can connect with and what is universal and why those moments work is because I get why he's frustrated, even though he's behaving in a way that I might not. I understand the impulse. And I think, that scene with Byrne we were just watching there, it is incredibly moving because of...
The writers developed, we haven't even spoken about all the different relationships that they built into the story. Who knows if Anna and Abe had a connection in that way, who knows? But they allowed us to develop, the stuff between characters is also history, is also life, and the stuff of life. And I think Byrne, he's just the best actor to work opposite. He is so generous and so... and also so unforgiving about his mission. It's lovely to work opposite. And I liked how the writers developed that relationship. I think it gave his character a different, more softer side. But yeah, I think so much is unsaid, right? I think of all the things that we're always thinking and we can't say, or we don't feel we ought to say, or we don't know what to say. I think whatever happens between people that's not verbal is a story in itself. Yeah.
And when you're in a situation of conflict, when you're in a war, not that I don't know this from personal experience, but I don't think you have time to say too much. You have to get on with it. And when I was reading early things in Alex's book, he talks about Tallmadge and Nathan Hale and their letters back and forth. And at the time, it was very popular, the sort of overly flowery purple prose of writing, and it was insane. Ridiculous the way that they were writing to each other. And I thought, oh God, is he one of these people that's just talking in this way? But first of all, they didn't talk like that. They wrote like that as this kind of fun, exercise. But when you're in a conflict, and that was what was great about working on set with the writers and with each other. I think they had a tendency sometimes to feel like, oh, we're in the past, we're in this time period, we have to write in a certain way. It's heightened language, which it was, and it had to be. But we could encourage them to, or try to help them simplify it and say, we don't have time to say it this way. We have to say it and move on, and find the ways in which it doesn't have to be said out loud and in as many words. And I totally agree with the relationships. And one thing that I think, just an example for my character, I don't think that the relationship between Tallmadge and Caleb Brewster, that they intended at the beginning for that to be the close kind of brotherly relationship that it became over the course of the series. And I think that was partly, that they found something in those characters, but Dan and I became really close and really had a great rapport on set together, and I think they saw that and found that was an interesting way to go, and that it kind of was able to stand in for some things that you couldn't do in terms of the reality of the story. Like I was saying at the beginning, his relationship with Nathan Hale and his relationship with his brother, which were so crucial in understanding his motivations and who he was in his personal story, that wasn't going to be a part of our story, but a relationship with another person in the show could give you the feeling and the texture of that. And so they took that and made that, more present and more a part of it. So whether or not it was true and real kind of doesn't matter to me, because it helped us understand those personal dynamics.
Well, let's go behind the scenes and talk personal dynamics. Best or worst accent on the set? Samuel, I think you live close to Liverpool. You grew up close to Liverpool, correct? A little bit north of there?
Yeah, in the north of England, yeah.
So can we judge some of our American actors and actresses on their British accents?
I think we were all excellent. Yeah. Also, yeah, I mean, the thing is, it was a very big conversation, wasn't it? About what my character was always going to be straight down the middle English. So that wasn't. It did come across as English, right?
It did?
Okay, good.
But not your English.
No,
you were
doesn't
doing.
sound, yeah, so it was more received pronunciation. Yeah.
We talked about it, but it was like Sam's saying. I think I had a phone call with a dialect coach like 2 days before we started shooting the pilot, and like much of the story, they didn't know exactly how people spoke in the colonies. So we decided, kind of based on how Jamie was approaching it, that we all wanted to sound similar, like a similar voice. But she sort of said somewhere between English and American and Scottish, and that was the direction. And so I think we all had to find our own particular ways into that. And then Daniel Henschel, who played Caleb, he started with a voice, and then they actually, after the pilot, wanted him to go in a different direction. So he had to actually readjust his dialect, which is, for actors, a huge part of your character. I mean, he had to kind of rethink that for the rest of the seasons.
They reshot scenes in the pilot with a different dialect choice.
For him, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a competition, but if we are going to pick winners, it strikes me that the Australians in our cast had the biggest stretch,
They had
didn't they?
a long way to go, I would say.
So Megan Warner and Dan
such a
Henschel,
sweet-
I think we can give them medals.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's fair.
They were really terrific.
But it was interesting as Americans, because the truth is that there was no American accent at the time. We were all British, but there were varying degrees of the length of time that our families would have been on this continent. So there would have been some more recent and some, that had been there longer, but also some from varying parts of the UK coming here. So it would have been a real kind of mix.
It's like the original transatlantic accent, isn't
right.
it, really?
And so, what they wanted for sure was for none of us to sound English the way that we think of English. But I had recently done a play set in Devonshire in England, which is a harder R sound and more rural English sound. So I was going in that direction. Jamie was going a little bit more in an Irish direction. So we could be a little bit different, and people might hear that and think like, oh, they're a little bit different. But the truth is they would have been a little bit different because they would have been coming from different backgrounds.
Also, I think there were deliberate creative decisions made to make the show feel contemporary in a way. Right. I think they were worried at the beginning that things would seem so far away, that it was like watching a documentary of the time or something, that they really wanted to draw audiences in. I remember there was a lot of discussion about the hat that Jamie's character wore, Abraham Woodhull. And I think it probably infuriates historians everywhere. But they thought, I don't really want him to wear a tricorn hat. I want him to wear something that looks like somebody out of, that lives in America right now could kind of connect to, even if it's not exactly what he would have worn. And I think there were little decisions like that made all the time, just to bring the audience closer to us, and I think that's okay.
I was just going to say, I think at the end of season 1, didn't we all get one of those hats?
I think we got a beanie, as a
You all got a big
tribute.
beanie.
Well, I had a bonnet. I had about 10 bonnets, so I'll never get rid of my bonnets.
Well, I love that you brought up the bonnets, the beanies, what you were wearing, how it was, filling in the times, because Setauket looked nothing at all like Northern and Central Virginia. So that's where you filmed most of it, correct? And so tell me about filming outdoors in the South having to wear the original period clothes? Heather, if you want to start there.
Well, luckily and unluckily, we shot mostly in the fall and winter months. I think every season, right? So if anything, I would always have to add cloaks and warming coats. I was often quite cold. And we would have hand warmers like tucked into our skirts and stuff like that. But the weather was an issue. It was snowing a lot. You have a good story about snow.
Yeah, in season 1, I think it was, the duel between Abe and Simcoe. I made one of the most stupid decisions of my acting career when I said, I think they should take their jackets off for this. And it just so happened that was the day the polar vortex landed. Do you remember that? And so at the beginning of the day, because they knew it was going to snow, we had these things called snow candles. This is a Hollywood way of creating snow with ash. And we thought, that's cute, isn't it? Look at that lovely snow they're creating. And of course, the reason was because later in the day, it was really going to snow, and in a way that it hadn't for generations. And as the scene went on, you were in this scene too, it got absolutely brutal. And if you look close enough, if you go back and watch it, you can see the red tip of the nose and a little bit of shivering throughout the whole scene. So yeah, it was very cold. And you've had some experiences with the cold.
Yeah, I mean, we also, when you have a night scene, obviously you're shooting all night because it takes a long time to shoot a scene. And we had a scene where we were out on the river. We were shooting on the James River, and a scene where we'd ride our horses up to the river, get off the horses, go out onto boats onto the river and actually launch into the river. And of course, the wind whipping down the river, it was freezing cold. And there were meant to be chunks of ice in the river, and they said, we'll have to put those in post-production, but on the day we got there, and there were chunks of ice in the river, so they weren't going to have to worry about that. But it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and we were filming this scene over and over again. You ride up, you get off, you get in the boats, you go out, you come back and do it again. And I was standing with the script supervisor by the warming heaters, and I looked over, and suddenly the horses had gone. I said, how are we going to do the shot again without the horses? And she said, well, they had to take the horses home because it got too cold for the horses. And I thought, I guess I'm in the wrong union. But it was. We were out, and so much of the show takes place outside. I mean, we had sound stages, but we were really out in the elements. And when it was raining, it was raining. When it was snowing, it was snowing.
There was one day we shot in, and it was so muddy that after we finished, I think like 25 crew members had to get towed from the parking lot because they had asked us to park on the field, and slowly all of their cars had sunk into the mud. It was a long day for them.
But there's also some really nice things about filming. Like, on a Friday, we used to get fried chicken. Used to come, honestly, piles of Southern fried chicken. We were in Virginia. It was absolutely amazing. I don't think I've ever eaten so many chicken thighs in one go as I did on the set of Turn.
Well, you were also telling me backstage that you were filming on a prison and you couldn't wear a certain color. There was something along those lines.
A large part of our backlot set, they built a whole town basically. There's a farm that is owned by the Commonwealth of Virginia that also operates as a detentional facility. So the inmates at the detentional facility work the farm, and then it's a very, very large piece of land, and they lease the land for various purposes. Many productions have shot there. Lincoln shot there, and John Adams shot there back in the day, and they built a house, and that house was still there, and then they built a whole town around that house, and that became the village of Setauket. But they did have a memo when we first started shooting there that we were advised not to wear orange because we would be. But it was very strange driving up to it. There was a dock. They had built a dock, and on one side was the town, and on the other side was just a field, and it was in post-production that they would make it look like a bay. So it was very, very strange. It looked, it just was a dock in the middle of nowhere, but they made it look like Oyster Bay. It was pretty cool.
Incredible visual effects, that.
Yeah, and you also had the opportunity to film at some great historic homes. Thomas Jefferson's birthplace and everything. Was there a particular place maybe, that you would go and film? You're like, oh, this is the place I'd love to film at. Maybe it was at Jefferson's house, or maybe over at the prison. Could it be anywhere like that?
I mean, shooting at Williamsburg was a very, very cool experience. And that was, I think we did maybe a couple things there, but some of the later things in this fourth season that we got to do there that were some of the culminating aspects of Washington riding in at the end of the war. I don't remember exactly what the historical events were, but that was very, very moving and just very interesting to be there, but also to be tying the elements of our show into the real history of the place. And we needed large crowd scenes, and we got people who, in Virginia, in Richmond, we had people who were very interested in the history and would come and do background work, but the people that came out to do it in Colonial Williamsburg were really passionate about the history, really interested in what we were doing, and really gave a level of authenticity to those big crowd scenes.
And those scenes are beautifully shot in Williamsburg. I mean, it's incredibly well done. Samuel?
Yeah, no, I love doing all the stuff in the woods, actually.
Yeah,
all of the
what
outdoor
was that called,
stuff.
that park we were shooting in all the time?
Oh, that's a good question. We'll see if we can remember in a minute. Go, start thinking. I'm not going to remember. Anyway, yes, but the woods stuff was really like, being outdoors, doing outdoors scenes. I know that sounds really simplistic, but the environment is a character all of its own, and that's why those houses are so, you remember them. It's because, the interaction with these sets and the interaction with the outdoors. I find personally as an actor, I get ideas from all the work the props people did, all of the production design. The best production design, there are things that are not in the script that work in a room. That you'll open a closet and it'll be set with things that would be there, even though it's not written in the scene. And that was what it was like on set. It was like it was an antiques roadshow. It was just incredible, all of this real furniture and props from the time, and so there was that, and in the same way, when you're out in the woods, be it at night or the conditions are the way that they are supposed to be in the scene, it really does inform everybody's work. And so I love that outdoors element that we were given too. And
just briefly, you were at some of these historic sites. Did you have a chance to visit any of these battlefields? Did you go down to Yorktown or anything, take in the scenery?
We were, personally, yes, that was one of the great things about being in Richmond, was to be able to go and visit those places. In terms of shooting, we shot near Yorktown. I don't think we actually shot on the battlefield per se, but we shot in Petersburg as well, which has, the history there. And so we were definitely near and around these places.
We all visited those places.
We definitely did, yeah. And Jamestown, we shot near Jamestown as well and got to visit there. There's just such a wealth of history there, and it was exciting to get more in touch with the colonial history that exists in that area. I hadn't spent much time in that area. I think Richmond, more Civil War history, but to get to see more of the Revolutionary War history was really
and
cool.
Not to be sentimental about this. I am an immigrant to this country, and a citizen now. I've been here for 15 years, and thank you, yeah. And Virginia, the same as Pennsylvania. It's beautiful. America is beautiful, and so. One of the great things about filming somewhere like Virginia is you get to see the rolling beauty that is America, and then you're doing the show that we were doing, and it was earned. It didn't come for free, And that's why shooting shows like this in those places, it's not a sentimental thing. It connects you to the source. These shows, they communicate to the audience because of the environment and because of what it took to earn it. And so I certainly, being in Virginia where we were shooting and around all of that really, heavily historic land, it all helps tell the story for that reason.
And I think that was well said. And I think that you all convey that, you and the whole cast. It's a true struggle. You weren't just struggling for independence or keeping the British Empire together. You're struggling with your lives, your daily lives, with your marriages, with your friends, your family. You're struggling with your commanding officer. I think it comes through. It's not just one struggle. It's an entire struggle because you're in this sphere. As we're starting to wind down, I have a couple hard-hitting questions for you. But before I get to those hard-hitting questions, I want to ask each one of you briefly, was there one person who's not on the stage that you are like, you see the call sheet for that day and you're like, yes, I'm really excited to act opposite of that person? Who was that person you were always like, yes, I'm so excited?
I've already mentioned it, but Daniel Henshaw and I became very close and continued. He's one of my closest friends, was at my wedding. He lives in Australia, so it's hard to be close friends, but I've been down there a few times already, and we became very close, and I loved getting to work with him. He's just a wonderful guy, and he tends to play very dark, scary characters, so this was a bit of a departure for him, but if you seek out his work, prepare to have a similar experience to watching Sam in his stuff.
I was always so thrilled to work with Jamie. I think he, being the main character of the show, he was commanding on screen, but as a person, he's incredibly jovial. He wants everyone to have a good time. He wants to know, he knows everybody's names. He was such a delightful number one on our show to work with, and so curious, asked so many questions, worked so hard. I mean, he spent his life, for those 4 years, his whole life was that show, and I think we all had a great respect for him.
Bern Gorman he's obviously just an incredibly skilled actor, so nuanced and always so present and generous, like you said, but also hilarious. I knew that every time I got on set with him, it was going to be a challenge to just hold it together, because everything he's doing is just so entertaining. So that was one. And I do have one. I was never put in a scene for obvious reasons with Washington. So that was always. I would have loved to have had, and Ian would say the same thing, that it would have always been a good scene between Washington and Simcoe, even though it could never have happened.
You mentioned Bern being funny. Was there a prankster on the set? Was there somebody on the set who would maybe move historical artifacts or show up in the background trying to break you as your character? Was there anybody who may have...
Angus McFadden was entertaining, wasn't he?
I don't know that he was intending to be a prankster. His general presence would prank us all.
Kevin McNally is very mischievous.
That's a good point. Yeah. He was mischievous in the lovely way. Yeah.
So I want you to think about the characters in turn. And if you could follow, and you can't answer your own character, if you could follow them on Twitter, which one would you follow and why?
Robert Rogers. Yeah. I mean,
that's a good one.
Because he's only posting when he's drunk. Entertainment for days.
Maybe Peggy Shippen would be a fun follow.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right? She'd have a lot to say. A lot of great pictures.
Good outfits.
Great outfit.
I mean, this is a weird answer, but I feel like Benedict Arnold would be...
That's my answer, Seth.
Really?
That's my answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like he would just be bitter all the time. And it'd just be fun to relish that.
Yeah, it's totally the Brady movie. Marcia, Marcia, Marcia. It's all about George, the whole time. Okay, so I have a couple other hard-hitting questions for you. This is a spy show. So, who's your favorite James Bond?
Wow.
The one who hasn't been hired yet?
Well, then my next question could be, who should be the next Bond then? Heather?
Not going there.
Going there.
I think Sam Roukin would be a good option.
I'm available. Maybe. I think with Bond, the one you grew up around the most, you have a particular affection for. So Roger Moore was really my Bond. But then when Daniel Craig showed up,
It's hard.
It's
yeah.
brilliant.
it's like, why can't I get out of the ocean like that? Aspirational.
Practice.
That's a quote you never thought you would hear on a Turn panel talking about the Revolutionary War.
I mean, it is tough though when the Sean Connerys come up on TV. It's just so deliciously ridiculous and entertaining. So I think that's got to be.
Yeah, I like Timothy Dalton because, again, like you said, I grew up with him, and I was a kid, and I was a real history nerd, and he talked about the Battle of Gettysburg in one of his. He's referring to it, and I was like, that's it, that's my Bond right there. So, and then Daniel Craig stepped out of the ocean, and I fell in love. So, another hard-hitting question. Jason Isaacs plays Colonel Tabington in The Patriot. He's another delicious antagonist. So, who would win in a battle? Tabington or Samuel's character? Do we think that it would be Simcoe or...
No question,
Simcoe,
Simcoe.
yeah.
No question.
He's evil.
Yeah.
So we have Simcoe up here. Audience, what do we think?
My guys.
You all fight. You would fight dirty. That's what I would be like.
That's the
And
thing.
not
That's the
hold
thing.
back.
Is there another way?
Exactly. All right. So, a final question for you. If your character could speak to modern audiences, what do you think they would want us to understand about their world?
I'll be honest, I never watched the show. Actors, sometimes it's hard for us to watch the show. I watch pieces of other people's performances because they're brilliant, but it's hard to watch yourself sometimes. So I never really watched the show. But watching those little clips from backstage, it made me, want to engage with it a little more again, and it's been enough time. But it made me think about my first scene in the pilot, or one of the first scenes of going to the prison to try to convince Abe to join the effort. And it's a tough sell, and Abe's not interested. And his reasons for not being interested are very personal. And something that I really appreciated about the Ken Burns documentary is the recognition of the number of people at the time. We think of like, which side are you on? And a lot of people were like, I'm on my side, because it's hard to live, it's hard to exist. And that's so real. And he was in that place of, I'm trying to make it on my own. And my character was coming to him and trying to say, this is all personal to all of us. Right. And I think that that's also and I want to see that scene and how it played, but I think that's coming all the way back to the first thing that I said here was I think Ben would want people to think about how the global is personal to all of us, and sometimes it's so easy to get shut off or want to shut ourselves off, but even if you're not directly connected in the ways that he was to these conflicts, we all are connected, and I don't know what that means, but it's got to mean something, and we all have to figure out what that means to all of us. So.
I think that was well said. Well, I want to thank you all for being up here today, and I want to give a big round of applause for our cast here.